On this week's, the discussion begins with several major royal headlines. The panel examines whether Prince Harry is close to abandoning plans to bring Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet back to the UK following another dispute over security arrangements. They also explore why King Charles's reported tax payments have made headlines and whether the larger issue is the estimated cost of funding the monarchy. In addition, they discuss reports that despite the extensive refurbishment of Buckingham Palace, King Charles may have decided not to make it his permanent residence. Host Matt Wilkinson, royal editor at The Sun, is joined by News.com.au royal reporter Bronte Coy and Talk TV host Mark Dolan to unpack the latest developments. The conversation quickly turns to Prince Harry's reported plans to visit the UK with his children. According to recent reports, the family was expected to stay in a royal residence with security arrangements in place. However, conflicting reports soon emerged suggesting those plans had not been finalized, with Harry reportedly maintaining that he cannot bring his children to Britain without adequate security. Mark Dolan argues that the dispute extends beyond simple logistical concerns. While the Sussexes have publicly framed the issue as one of safety, he suggests the disagreement is also deeply connected to family dynamics and broader questions surrounding royal security. In his view, Prince Harry is seeking permanent, state-funded protection whenever he visits the UK, potentially creating a precedent for future international travel. Dolan also claims that King Charles's desire to spend time with his grandchildren complicates the situation, making negotiations particularly sensitive. The panel further discusses reports that the palace had been willing to offer royal accommodation and facilitate a family meeting, possibly including King Charles spending time with Archie and Lilibet. However, despite those reported efforts, the ongoing disagreement over security has continued to dominate the headlines. Matt Wilkinson compares the situation to previous disputes involving the Sussexes, noting that only days earlier reports suggested the family's UK visit was moving ahead as planned. Those same reports also acknowledged that security arrangements had not yet been finalized. When uncertainty resurfaced shortly afterward, questions were raised about whether the visit had ever been firmly confirmed or whether negotiations were still ongoing. Bronte Coy describes the situation as increasingly chaotic. She notes that recent weeks had appeared to signal a broader effort to improve the Sussexes' public standing in Britain, particularly ahead of promotional events connected to the Invictus Games and renewed speculation about family reconciliation. Given those expectations, she says the sudden uncertainty surrounding the trip has been surprising. Although the latest information still suggests the visit is expected to proceed, she observes that the situation appears to be changing rapidly. Coy concludes that, regardless of whether the visit ultimately takes place, the controversy itself has become the dominant story. She argues that the ongoing uncertainty has strengthened criticism from some commentators, who view the repeated public disputes as creating unnecessary drama. While she does not believe Prince Harry is intentionally attempting to emotionally pressure his father, she suggests he may simply be reacting emotionally to recent developments. Regardless of his intentions, she notes that the public perception of the situation has become increasingly difficult for the Sussexes to manage. The discussion continues by addressing criticism that Prince Harry's handling of the situation resembles emotional pressure on the royal family. Some commentators question whether he ever genuinely intended to bring his children to the UK or whether the announcement was part of a broader strategy connected to the ongoing security dispute. Bronte Coy responds by explaining that, based on conversations with sources close to the Sussexes, Prince Harry reportedly believed there were reasons to expect a favorable outcome regarding his security arrangements. According to those accounts, plans for the visit moved forward because there was optimism that the security review announced previously would result in the level of protection he had requested. However, when it became clear that those expectations might not be met, the situation reportedly changed quickly. Mark Dolan offers a different interpretation. He argues that publicly announcing the visit before security arrangements were finalized placed both the palace and the Sussexes in a difficult position. In his view, this approach mirrors previous disputes involving the couple, where positive developments were later overshadowed by public disagreements. Dolan suggests that what initially appeared to be a hopeful story, including the possibility of King Charles seeing his grandchildren, ultimately became dominated by renewed controversy. The panel discusses reports that King Charles may have been prepared to host Prince Harry and his children at a royal residence, creating an opportunity for a family reunion. Some speculation even suggested that the visit could have encouraged broader reconciliation within the royal family, although the presenters acknowledged that such outcomes remained uncertain. Bronte Coy maintains that the original plans appear to have been genuine, explaining that Prince Harry was reportedly disappointed after learning that the security arrangements he expected were unlikely to materialize. She notes that, regardless of whether his concerns stem from genuine fears for his family's safety, the public narrative has now shifted away from reconciliation and toward another highly publicized disagreement. Mark Dolan challenges the security argument, questioning why visits to the UK are portrayed as uniquely risky when the Sussexes regularly travel internationally and reside in the United States. He argues that royal residences are among the most heavily protected locations in the country, making it difficult, in his opinion, to understand claims that such visits could not be conducted safely. The conversation then turns to the contrast between Prince Harry's approach and that of Prince William. The panel notes that William is often able to spend private time with King Charles alongside his children without public announcements or media attention. They argue that the privacy surrounding those family visits demonstrates that members of the royal family can maintain personal relationships away from public scrutiny. Matt Wilkinson questions why Prince Harry's proposed visit became a major public story before it took place, suggesting that a quieter, private family visit may have attracted far less attention. Bronte Coy speculates that announcing the plans in advance may have been intended to prepare the public for the visit or gauge public reaction, though she emphasizes that this is only speculation. Instead, the announcement appears to have backfired after uncertainty over security arrangements quickly became the dominant headline. The panel concludes by acknowledging that there are understandable reasons for Prince Harry to want his children to spend time with King Charles, particularly as Archie and Lilibet have had limited opportunities to build memories with their grandfather. The discussion then shifts to considering what role Meghan Markle may have in any future visit to the UK. The discussion then shifts to Meghan Markle's potential motivations for returning to the UK. Mark Dolan argues that the trip could carry significant professional value for her, suggesting that her commercial ventures rely heavily on her public profile. He claims that appearing alongside the royal family, particularly if she were seen entering or leaving a royal residence, could reinforce her royal associations and generate positive publicity. In contrast, he believes Prince Harry's motivations are more personal, suggesting that he misses his family, his former royal role, and life in Britain, while also wanting his children to spend time with King Charles. Dolan speculates that these differing priorities may create tension, as he views Harry's interest as emotional and Meghan's as primarily strategic. The panel agrees that images of the Sussexes staying at a royal residence would likely attract significant media attention, regardless of the motivations behind the visit. They note that such coverage could be interpreted by some observers as a sign of improving relations between the couple and the royal family. Attention then returns to the long-running dispute over security. Matt Wilkinson notes that after Prince Harry's legal challenge over his UK security arrangements was unsuccessful, many believe the issue had largely been settled. He asks whether Harry would appear inconsistent if he ultimately traveled to Britain under the same security conditions he had previously argued were insufficient for his family. Bronte Coy responds that she believes Prince Harry's concerns about security are genuine, even if many people disagree with his position. However, she argues that, following the court's decision, he may eventually need to find alternative arrangements rather than continuing to rely on the same demands. She suggests that the prolonged dispute has become increasingly difficult to sustain and now dominates public discussion of any potential UK visit. Mark Dolan questions why Prince Harry has consistently described the UK as presenting a unique security risk while he and Meghan continue to travel internationally. He notes that the couple have visited numerous countries without receiving the same level of state-funded protection they have requested in Britain, leading him to question the consistency of the argument. Coy acknowledges that Prince Harry has reportedly been advised that Britain presents particular security concerns, although she says the basis for that assessment has not been made public. Dolan then recounts a recent conversation he says he had with former Royal Protection Officer Ken Worf, who previously served as Princess Diana's bodyguard. According to Dolan, Worf expressed confidence that Prince Harry would be protected through cooperation between his private security team and British authorities during any visit to the UK. Dolan adds that Worf believes the disagreement is less about personal safety and more about the official status and visibility associated with state-provided royal protection. The panel also discusses comparisons reportedly made between Prince Harry's security situation and the protection provided to figures such as Salman Rushdie and Taylor Swift. Those comparisons reference the specific threats both individuals have faced, including long-term security concerns in Rushdie's case and heightened protection for Swift following terrorism-related threats connected to her concerts. Matt Wilkinson asks whether extending similar protection to Prince Harry could finally bring the long-running dispute to an end. Bronte Coy replies that, while she understands the desire to resolve the issue, she does not believe simply granting every request necessarily provides a lasting solution. She notes that the disagreement is unlikely to disappear until Prince Harry eventually returns to Britain under whatever security arrangements are ultimately agreed upon. According to reports discussed by the panel, alternative options, including staying within the secure grounds of a royal residence, have reportedly been considered. Finally, the presenters question why the Sussexes are reportedly comfortable traveling elsewhere in Europe while continuing to argue that visits to Britain require exceptional security measures. Mark Dolan points to previous international trips, including Meghan's visit to Paris, as examples of travel undertaken without the same publicly debated security arrangements. He concludes that he does not believe giving in to Prince Harry's demands would resolve the broader issues surrounding the dispute, arguing instead that similar compromises in the past have not prevented further disagreements. The discussion continues with Mark Dolan arguing that previous efforts to accommodate the Sussexes did not prevent further public disputes. He points to earlier periods when, in his view, the late Queen made significant efforts to welcome the couple and adapt established royal practices, yet they still later portrayed themselves as having been treated unfairly. Based on this, he argues that making additional concessions now would be unlikely to resolve the ongoing disagreements. Dolan also questions whether the Sussexes' public messaging has been consistent. He cites examples of changing public statements over the years, including differing explanations surrounding the allegations made during the Oprah Winfrey interview and the evolving messaging about security arrangements for a possible UK visit. In his opinion, these shifts suggest that the couple's communications are often reactive rather than part of a clearly defined long-term strategy. Bronte Coy agrees that Prince Harry appears to respond emotionally to developments, suggesting that this may have contributed to the current situation. However, she also emphasizes that an official review of Harry's security arrangements had reportedly been announced previously, raising questions about why that process was later paused or delayed. She argues that if the review was initially considered necessary, it is understandable that Harry may have expected a clear outcome before making final travel plans. The panel also discusses concerns that granting Prince Harry the level of state-funded protection he has requested could establish a precedent for future visits. They reference commentary suggesting that if those arrangements were approved once, similar requests could follow whenever the Sussexes travel to the UK, potentially expanding to overseas visits as well. Despite their disagreements over the issue, the presenters stress that everyone involved wants Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and their children to remain safe. Bronte Coy notes that while many people may disagree with Harry's preferred solution, they can still understand that his concerns may be influenced by the trauma he experienced earlier in life and his desire to protect his family. She concludes that the current situation has become increasingly complicated and that a practical resolution will eventually be needed. The conversation then shifts to another royal topic, King Charles's finances. Matt Wilkinson asks whether it is significant that King Charles has publicly disclosed the amount of tax he voluntarily paid, noting that the king reportedly paid approximately £12.9 million during the most recent financial year. Bronte Coy argues that the disclosure reflects a broader effort by the monarchy to become more transparent at a time of increased public scrutiny. She suggests that recent controversies involving members of the royal family have heightened calls for greater openness, making the publication of financial information an important step towards strengthening public trust. At the same time, she notes that while the figures reveal how much tax was paid, they do not provide a detailed picture of the king's overall wealth or financial position. Mark Dolan points out that the monarch is not legally required to pay income tax, and that these payments are made voluntarily. He also notes that King Charles has a long history of supporting greater financial transparency, having published tax information while serving as Prince of Wales. In his view, the current disclosures represent a continuation of efforts to modernize the monarchy and demonstrate accountability to the public. The panel agrees that greater transparency is likely to benefit the institution in the long term, even though explaining the finances of the monarch and the Prince of Wales remains a complex task due to the variety of estates, investments, and other income sources involved. Dolan also argues that public debate about the royal family's wealth should be viewed in context, noting that much of the monarchy's wealth consists of historic assets rather than personal spending money. He concludes by suggesting that, despite their substantial resources, members of the royal family have generally maintained a reputation for relatively careful financial management. The discussion continues with a lighter conversation about King Charles's personal habits and reputation for frugality. The presenters recall stories from former royal staff, suggesting that both the late Queen and King Charles were known for avoiding unnecessary waste. They mention accounts of leftovers being carefully stored, older household items remaining in use for many years, and Charles continuing to wear well-maintained clothing long after most people might have replaced it. These anecdotes are presented as examples of a practical approach to personal spending despite the family's considerable wealth. The panel also notes that Prince William has now joined King Charles in publicly disclosing the amount of tax he voluntarily pays. While Charles has released similar information in previous years, William's decision to do the same is described as another sign of the monarchy's commitment to greater financial transparency. According to the figures discussed, the Duchy of Cornwall paid approximately £7.76 million in income tax and capital gains tax during the latest reporting period. Matt Wilkinson observes that most people prefer to keep their finances private, suggesting that voluntarily publishing tax information represents a significant step toward openness. The conversation then broadens to a larger question: whether the public funding allocated to the monarchy represents good value for taxpayers. The presenters explain that the sovereign grant, the primary source of public funding for the official duties of the monarchy, is set to approach £100 million annually under the current funding formula. They note that the system links the grant to a percentage of the profits generated by the Crown Estate, and that recent increases have drawn renewed public attention, particularly because the grant has risen substantially over the past few years. Bronte Coy points out that part of the recent increase was connected to the long-term refurbishment of Buckingham Palace, a project costing approximately £369 million. Even so, she notes that the core sovereign grant has increased significantly in a relatively short period, prompting understandable questions from taxpayers about whether the monarchy continues to provide value for money. She also references recent opinion polls suggesting that public support for the monarchy has softened, making debates over royal funding more prominent. Mark Dolan argues that the rising costs should be viewed within the broader context of inflation and increasing operating expenses affecting many institutions worldwide. He notes that the royal household faces many of the same financial pressures experienced by other organizations and suggests that King Charles has attempted to demonstrate restraint through measures such as holding a more modest coronation than some had expected. The discussion also highlights reports that both King Charles and Prince William favor a more streamlined approach to the monarchy, with William reportedly expected to continue emphasizing relatively modest living arrangements compared with some traditional royal residences. Dolan argues that these decisions reflect an effort to modernize the institution while remaining conscious of public expectations regarding spending. Turning to the broader value of the monarchy, Dolan argues that the institution provides benefits beyond its direct financial cost. He describes the royal family as an important part of Britain's international identity, suggesting that state visits, diplomatic engagements, and ceremonial events generate goodwill and enhance the country's global image. In his view, the monarch serves as a distinctive national representative whose role differs from that of elected political leaders. Bronte Coy agrees that the monarchy contributes significantly to Britain's cultural identity and international reputation. She notes that royal events, historic palaces, and public appearances continue to attract global attention and tourism, making the overall value of the institution difficult to measure purely in financial terms. At the same time, she acknowledges that the increasing size of the sovereign grant will likely remain a subject of public debate as taxpayers continue to examine the costs and benefits associated with the monarchy. The panel concludes by reflecting on King Charles's recent visit to the United States, arguing that the diplomatic reception he received illustrates one of the less tangible benefits of the monarchy. While assigning a precise monetary value to such international influence may be impossible, they suggest it remains an important consideration in discussions about the monarchy's long-term role in public funding. The conversation turns to the value of Buckingham Palace following its extensive £369 million refurbishment and reports that King Charles and Queen Camilla intend to continue living primarily at Clarence House rather than moving into the palace. Mark Dolan argues that the monarchy's diplomatic role is difficult to measure purely in financial terms. Reflecting on King Charles's recent visit to the United States, he suggests that the king's address to Congress and the positive international attention it generated provided significant value for Britain. In his view, the benefits of such diplomatic engagements cannot easily be calculated in monetary terms. Matt Wilkinson then raises the question of whether the substantial investment in Buckingham Palace is justified if the monarch no longer intends to use it as his main residence. He asks whether the palace could lose some of its symbolic importance if future monarchs also choose to live elsewhere. Bronte Coy responds that Buckingham Palace remains far more than a private home. She notes that it serves as the administrative headquarters of the monarchy, hosts state occasions and official receptions, and remains the setting for iconic public moments, such as royal balcony appearances. She also emphasizes that the refurbishment benefits a historic public building rather than simply improving a private residence for the king. The presenters compare the palace's renovation with other major public restoration projects across Britain, arguing that historic national buildings inevitably require substantial long-term investment. They note that Buckingham Palace continues to function as one of the country's most important ceremonial and constitutional landmarks. Matt Wilkinson observes that increasing numbers of official events and public tours have transformed Buckingham Palace into a much more accessible venue than in previous decades. While he welcomes greater public access, he wonders whether the building now functions more as a public institution than as the monarch's actual home. Bronte Coy acknowledges feeling a sense of nostalgia about the change. She recalls that for many visitors from around the world, Buckingham Palace has long represented the symbolic home of the British monarch. Seeing the royal standard flying above the palace traditionally signaled that the sovereign was in residence, adding to its unique appeal for tourists and royal supporters alike. At the same time, Coy says she understands why King Charles and Queen Camilla may prefer to remain at Clarence House. Having lived there for many years, they are well established in the residence, and the king's recent health challenges may make moving into a much larger property less appealing. She suggests that expanding public access to Buckingham Palace could help reassure taxpayers that the significant refurbishment costs are delivering wider public benefits. The panel also reflects on the irony that, although senior members of the royal family reportedly prefer living elsewhere, Buckingham Palace is still expected to accommodate visiting royals when necessary. They discuss suggestions that the palace can feel less private than other royal residences because of its central London location and the constant public attention surrounding its entrances and exits. Matt Wilkinson notes that recent renovation work has modernized parts of the palace while preserving its historic character. He describes it as both an important working building and a major visitor attraction, housing priceless works from the royal collection and welcoming members of the public through guided tours. Mark Dolan concludes that Buckingham Palace should continue functioning primarily as the operational headquarters of the monarchy, rather than becoming solely a museum or tourist attraction. He argues that, much like the Palace of Westminster remains the active center of British democracy, Buckingham Palace retains its significance because it continues to play a central role in the daily work of the monarchy, regardless of where the king chooses to spend most of his nights. The discussion then turns to the Princess of Wales and her recent completion of the National Three Peaks Challenge. Matt Wilkinson notes that anticipation had been building after journalists were told an important announcement involving Catherine was coming. Initial speculation centered on her health, but it was soon revealed that she had successfully completed the demanding challenge, which involves climbing the highest peaks in Scotland, England, and Wales within 24 hours. Wilkinson praises both the photographs and videos released following the achievement, highlighting Catherine's interactions with fellow hikers and her accompanying message to cancer survivors. In her remarks, she emphasized that those living with or recovering from cancer are not alone and encouraged people to find hope, purpose, and strength beyond treatment. The challenge also supported the work of the Royal Marsden Hospital, reinforcing her long-standing commitment to cancer awareness and patient support. Bronte Coy describes the achievement as deeply inspiring. She notes that Catherine's personal video, filmed in a relaxed and informal style, allowed viewers to connect with her in a particularly authentic way. According to Coy, the message resonated because it focused not only on Catherine's own recovery, but also on encouraging others facing similar experiences. She also points out that completing the National Three Peaks Challenge is a significant physical accomplishment, with many participants unable to finish within the required time limit. Mark Dolan agrees, describing Catherine's achievement as further evidence of her remarkable recovery following cancer treatment. He recalls that, even after announcing she was in remission, Catherine had acknowledged that recovery continues long after treatment ends. In his view, successfully completing such a demanding physical challenge demonstrates both resilience and determination. The panel also discusses Catherine's broader approach to public life. Dolan argues that both the Prince and Princess of Wales have increasingly focused on initiatives that create long-term social impact, rather than simply fulfilling ceremonial duties. He points to Prince William's environmental and homelessness campaigns, alongside Catherine's work promoting the importance of nature, early childhood development, and mental well-being. According to Dolan, Catherine has developed a distinctive public style that combines dignity with approachability. He suggests that she carefully balances her privacy while remaining relatable, making carefully chosen public appearances before returning to a quieter family life. The presenters agree that this approach has strengthened her public image and helped make her charitable campaigns especially effective. Matt Wilkinson observes that Catherine's recent public appearances, including her successful visit to Italy and the Three Peaks Challenge, have generated overwhelmingly positive attention. He contrasts these stories with some of the more contentious royal headlines of recent weeks, suggesting that her achievements have provided a welcome reminder of the positive work carried out by members of the royal family. As the program draws to a close, the discussion shifts to Princess Diana on what would have been her 65th birthday. Wilkinson mentions a newly released documentary reflecting on Diana's life and legacy before asking the panel to share their personal memories. Mark Dolan recalls Diana's extraordinary global impact, describing her as the figure who helped transform the British royal family into a modern international phenomenon. While acknowledging that many famous public figures came before her, he argues that Diana became one of the first royals to achieve true worldwide celebrity status. He concludes by saying that, decades after her death, many people still feel her absence and continue to regard her as one of the most influential and beloved figures in modern royal history. The panel concludes its discussion on Princess Diana by reflecting on her lasting impact and the continued public affection for her decades after her death. Mark Dolan says she remains deeply missed by her children and the wider public, recalling the emotional images of Prince William and Prince Harry following her funeral procession. He describes Diana as a figure defined by empathy, beauty, and a well-known sense of humor, adding that her legacy remains unmatched within the modern royal family. Bronte Coy shares her reflections from participating in a recent documentary marking what would have been Diana's 65th birthday. She describes the experience of speaking with photographers such as Arthur Edwards and Ingrid Seward, noting that many of the iconic images associated with Diana carry personal stories that are not widely known. She explains that although she was very young when Diana died, her influence remains so strong that it feels as though people of her generation grew up with a clear understanding of who Diana was, even without direct experience of her life. Coy adds that Diana's legacy continues to resonate because of her transformation into a global cultural figure. She recalls that for many people, Diana represents the idea of a modern fairy tale princess, and that even those born after her death feel a strong emotional connection to her story. She concludes that Diana's memory remains deeply embedded in public consciousness and continues to shape perceptions of the royal family. The program then shifts to a lighter segment, as Matt Wilkinson presents guests with themed merchandise from the Royal Collection Trust, including an afternoon tea plush set featuring items such as a teapot, teacup, and various cake-inspired designs. The panel reacts playfully, identifying the items and joking about their novelty value. Wilkinson explains that the merchandise is officially produced and sold through Royal Collection Trust outlets, with proceeds supporting the conservation of royal artworks and historical objects. Mark Dolan welcomes the merchandise as part of the royal family's broader branding strategy, noting that royal souvenirs have a long history, including commemorative items produced for royal weddings and jubilees. He suggests that such products contribute to national branding and public engagement with the monarchy. The discussion briefly turns to historical royal memorabilia, with references to past collectibles from the weddings of King Charles and Princess Diana. The panel notes that royal-themed products have long been a feature of public life in the UK, reflecting ongoing interest in the monarchy. Finally, the conversation moves to a lighthearted question about the future use of Buckingham Palace if it is no longer primarily used as a royal residence. Mark Dolan jokingly suggests that, given pressures on prison capacity and public order concerns, the building could theoretically be repurposed as a high-security facility. He adds humorously that entertainment inside such a facility could be restricted to royal-themed programming, underscoring the satirical nature of the suggestion. The conversation closes with a lighthearted continuation of the earlier discussion about potential alternative uses for Buckingham Palace. Mark Dolan expands on his earlier satirical suggestion, comparing the palace to a modern-day equivalent of the Tower of London due to its historical significance. He jokes that, if it were ever repurposed in a more extreme way, it could even be used as a prison facility, with tongue-in-cheek ideas such as playing audiobooks to inmates for comedic effect. The tone remains clearly humorous and not intended as a serious policy proposal. Bronte Coy offers a different and more optimistic idea, suggesting that Buckingham Palace's large courtyard and historic setting could make an ideal venue for concerts or large-scale public events. She describes the idea of performances taking place in the evening against the backdrop of the palace as visually striking and culturally appealing. The discussion then shifts to more imaginative suggestions for the building's future use. Wilkinson jokes that Buckingham Palace could function as a kind of escape room experience for tourists, reflecting the growing popularity of interactive attractions in major cities. The panel briefly agrees that, if considered commercially, the palace could even operate as a high-end hotel, although they acknowledge that this would raise practical complications given its current role and occasional royal use. The conversation then returns to Catherine, Princess of Wales, following her completion of the Three Peaks Challenge. Wilkinson asks what extreme challenge she might attempt next. Bronte Coy suggests a tough Mudder-style obstacle course, describing it as a natural progression from her recent physical achievement. She also jokes about the idea of a light-hearted role reversal in which Catherine could surprise Meghan Markle during a visit to California, though the comment is made in a clearly playful and speculative tone. Mark Dolan continues the humorous framing, suggesting further fictional scenarios involving royal interactions. Before the presenters move on to a final audience-style question inspired by the royal merchandise segment. The final question asks which member of the royal family would be best known for giving a comforting hug. Dolan jokingly references Prince Andrew in a deliberately provocative aside before quickly moving on. He then suggests that King Charles might be perceived as the most naturally warm and approachable, describing him as having a friendly and grandfatherly presence, supported by public images of him interacting warmly with others at official events. Yes, the program concludes. Matt Wilkinson thanks his guests for their contributions and reflects on the wide range of topics covered, from serious royal issues to lighter, more humorous speculation. He notes the uncertainty surrounding potential upcoming royal developments involving Prince Harry and his family, before signing off and encouraging viewers to subscribe for future updates on Royal Exclusive.